Good to see all of you. We are in the book of Ezekiel, and I kind of committed early in the study that we were going to try to cover a lesson a week, and I ended up doing too much background the first study that's got us behind on lesson 1, and then somebody asked me a question about how a guy could be 8 and 18 simultaneously, and so we ran that for a little while. But hopefully tonight maybe we can get on track to kind of cover not so much ground. I talked to a couple guys the other day. You don't want to go so fast that you don't get anything out of it, and you don't want to go so slow that you don't get anything out of it. And so somewhere there's a balance there, and so we'll try to do the best we can to manage through that together here in this study. And so we're looking collectively, because Ezekiel chapter 2 and 3 kind of work together. The sentiments and thoughts of that portion kind of run concurrent throughout both of those chapters. And so when you study and read and appreciate what Ezekiel shares with us in this text, then you and I can appreciate the fact that there's this kind of running theme throughout chapters 2 and 3 as he gets commissioned or called to serve the purposes that God has in store for him. And so if you're looking at the lesson sheets, we're about down to question or 3 or so in the question sheets of lesson 2. If you don't have that whole set, let me know. I do have a few copies still of the whole set. And then Wednesday to Wednesday, I'll try to share that on the table as whatever lesson we're happen to be on that particular evening. And for those of you at home, jump off YouTube for a minute and run over to our website at PadenCityChurchOfChrist.com, and you can download. There's a link there where you can download this material as well. Can't get it from the YouTube side. You got to get it from the website side of things, but it is there for your use. Okay, so we talked last week about this concept of spirit and how the spirit was basically kind of doing two things. First, it was moving what? So what was the Spirit moving in chapter 1 initially? Yeah, it was but it's moving the vision, right? This massive vision of these various types and kinds of things was being moved forward by the Spirit. Now we've transitioned. The Spirit is now going to be moving whom? Ezekiel, right? And so this Spirit, we talked several minutes last week about the idea that it could mean the Holy Spirit. It could be a very direct kind of connotation of the Holy Spirit of God. It could just mean the Spirit of God, the power and influence of God moving Ezekiel. But the key to understanding that is not so much who as to what they're doing. And what they're doing is they're moving things forward. And that's what has to happen with Ezekiel. Yeah.
Was it especially because they was direct contact with God?
Yeah. And it's an interesting question, and that's the next question on our list. By what name or designation does Jehovah call Ezekiel? And in chapter 2 and in verse 1, we find the phrase Ezekiel, or he said unto me, Son of man. And Bob's question relates to the fact that there really only, among the prophets anyway, 2 times you see that. You see it here with Ezekiel, and you see it with Daniel. Interestingly, you see it with Daniel once. With Ezekiel, you see it 93 times. If you go through the book of Ezekiel, you'll find 93, if I added them up right, 93 times that there is a point of reference to him as Son of Man. Generally, if I were to ask you that very quickly, and we know that there is that one moment where Daniel seems to have kind of the same kind of reference, and maybe with Daniel, especially at the moment where it's kind of part of a vision that he's receiving, and Daniel's visions really were pointing to whom? The time that they would know that the Messiah had arrived, right? His visions are generally about the idea of showing you that here's a piece of history, and then this piece of history, and this piece of history. And then when you get to that fourth layer, that's the time in which the Christ would come, who then throughout the New Testament writers who gets referenced as the Son of Man? Jesus does, right? So Jesus is the one that ultimately becomes known as the Son of Man. And what did Jesus come to do? Okay, to seek and to save the lost. And by what means was he going to do that? Okay, so he's going to teach them. He's going to bring a message to them that would bring them benefit. And it's going to come, when you think of Son of Man, you think of it coming in what form? In human form, right? So what's Ezekiel going to do? What's he being called to do?
He's taking a message.
That's right. He's being called to take a message to the people. Is it going to be well received or not well received? Generally speaking, was Jesus' message well received or not well received? Particularly among the same populace of people. And so the reason I believe Ezekiel, back to your question, why I believe Ezekiel in particular is on multiple occasions throughout the 40 plus chapters is referred to as the Son of Man, is the purposes and work, and in some senses even some of the same similar challenges to that work parallel what's ultimately going to happen with Jesus. And I think that's why the multitude of times when you read in the Bible that phrase Son of Man, it's generally speaking 99% of the time in reference to one of those two guys, either Ezekiel or Jesus. And that seems to me to be the reasoning why. This message was going to come through earthly form. And again, you see it. He notes in the lesson sheets, he starts in chapter 1 and in chapter 2 and in verse 1. He notes that it happens again in verse 6. This idea of Son of Man, sometimes capitalized, sometimes not, but generally speaking, always referencing Ezekiel himself. Some narratives use the phrase, but they're not necessarily referencing that individual. Sometimes the phrase is used in its definitive form. What I mean by that is sometimes you'll read in Scripture where it says Son of Man, and that's what it means. It means they're human. It means that they were born into the human race. Other times it has very specific connotations, as it does with Ezekiel. But chapter 2 and verse 8 does it again. Chapter 3 and verse 1, chapter 3 and verse 3, 4. And I'm not going to look at them all because we could just keep going clear through all the way to the end of the book. And like I stated before, I think roughly 93 times you're going to see the phrase used in reference to Ezekiel himself. Yeah, maybe, I told you sometimes I'd have to answer questions that way, but possibly. There could be reasons that are beyond our scope of understanding of why, or what conclusion Ezekiel, we don't necessarily know those kinds of things, right? What Ezekiel concluded about why it was being called that throughout. I still concur. What I've always seen is just the idea that there's a message that's going to be delivered from a human voice to the people, and Son of Man, get to work. And he keeps coming back to that thought. That's the kind of thing that I saw within the narrative. But that's absolutely potentially valid. And I guess maybe I'll back up a half step, and I appreciate the fact that you're making that connection to Daniel. I did not make as strong a connection to Daniel as I did to Jesus when it comes to that secondary question of who else is also known, just because of the manner in which the single reference in specific that Daniel has connection to. Multiple times that there's references to Jesus through that same phrase. So what kind of nation then was he going to find? Okay, so rebellious or obstinate or stubborn. Notice verses 3 and 4 of chapter 2. And he said unto me, Son of man, I send thee to the children of Israel, to a rebellious nation that hath rebelled against me. They and their fathers have transgressed against me, even unto this very day. For they are impudent children and stiff-hearted. I do send thee unto them, and thou shalt say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God. Kind of people you want to go have a conversation with? No, right? God is being very clear with Ezekiel here that your audience is not going to be what you would hope for. You're going to go to a rebellious, evil, they've transgressed and sinned against God, even unto this very day. What do you think when you see that? That phrase, even unto this very day. What have they been witnessing? So that's right. So they've already witnessed their sister nation, right? They've already seen Israel go off into captivity. They witnessed that. They've witnessed Babylonians come down, create difficulties, establish a new set of rulers and say, listen, if you guys will adhere to us, you'll be fine. They go home, they rebel, gives Nebuchadnezzar, he comes back, and he comes back. And so you've got this period of time where they should have been seeing evidence that some change needed to take place. They're not, in other words, they're not without excuse here. They've had every opportunity to understand and know that they have transgressed and gone outside of the will and purposes of God. They've had every opportunity to turn from that. And God says, when you go to them, they have continued to transgress me. Even though people are being taken captive, even though they've been under besiegement, even though all of this calamity has fallen upon them, they still haven't changed. Go talk to them anyway. Go present my message. Go tell them that thus saith whom? Go saith the Lord. They're stubborn. They're stiff-necked, stiff-hearted, are going to be resistant to the message you present, but go tell them, thus saith the Lord, anyway. Quick education, I suppose, or application from that is simply this. Thus saith the Lord is always important, irregardless of what the listener does with that information. Irregardless of how people respond to the message of the Lord, it's always important. And he was to go and declare that to a nation that would not necessarily be all that receptive to his message. So that's the character of the people. What expectation did God have concerning Judah in verse 5 of chapter 2? Okay, so, and they, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are a rebellious house, yet shall know that there hath been a prophet among them. The response may not be favorable, but at the end, if you go speak, thus saith the Lord, they will know that a prophet came to present to them a message that was important in this process. Jump to chapter 3, you're going to see a parallel thought in verses 4 through 8. Ezekiel chapter 3, verses 4 through 8. And he said unto me, Son of man, there's a phrase again, go get thee unto the house of Israel, and speak with my words unto them. For thou art not sent to a people of a strange speech, and of an hard language, but to the house of Israel. All the challenging things that could have come up for the work of a prophet, because some prophets are sent into foreign lands. And the challenges of that kind of work would be far greater and more difficult. But not for you, Ezekiel. This isn't going to be a language issue. This isn't going to be a communication problem. There are going to be other issues. Not too many people of a strange speech and of a hard language, whose words thou canst not understand. Surely had I sent thee to them, they would have hearkened unto thee. I could have sent you to a foreign nation and they would have listened. I'm sending you to my people who don't have a language barrier, and yet they're rebellious. But the house of Israel will not hearken unto thee, for they will not hearken unto me. So God looks at Ezekiel and says, listen, go tell them, thus saith the Lord, and it's your job to do it anyway. And they're obstinate, they're stiff-hearted, they're rebellious, they've had every opportunity to learn things along the road, but they won't. I'm going to give you a message to them that if I sent you to deliver to a foreign nation, they would have been more receptive than the people of God are going to be. And you're going to feel like that you want to take it how? Personal. But don't, because really they're really rejecting God. They won't hearken unto you, but don't feel like that's a failure, Ezekiel, because they're not listening to me either. For all the house of Israel are impudent and hard-hearted. Behold, I have made thy face strong against their faces, and thy forehead strong against their foreheads. Sometimes, when the message of God is presented, it becomes confrontational. It's not necessarily God's fault that it becomes confrontational. And it's this face-to-face, forehead-to-forehead kind of imagery. But when you take an obstinate, stubborn, stiff-hearted, rebellious heart and attitude that still needs to hear what the truth of a circumstance is, it's going to create a confrontational kind of moment. It's going to be uncomfortable, Ezekiel. It's forehead to forehead. When you go to deliver this message to a people who don't want to hear it, don't want to pay attention to it, have no interest in changing, but you're going to have to go and deliver that message anyway. Good. Yeah. This didn't come overnight. God's frustration level has risen over years while He's patiently tried to get His people to get themselves in better relationship with Him. And any confrontation that occurs through this situation is in their accountability because of their disposition and attitude towards His message. Go ahead, Brenda.
Sounds to me like they're combining the ideologies of this could never happen to me with I don't want to hear this message, therefore I'm going to be mean to the person who's giving it to me in the hopes that he will shut up.
Yeah. And that's going to happen with Ezekiel, is exactly what's going to kind of happen with him when he goes. Because they've already done that with Jeremiah and others who they didn't want to listen to, and if we can feel like we can punish them enough, maybe they'll just be quiet. But God's going to challenge Ezekiel to speak anyway, even though that happens. Go ahead, Kent.
He dated Moses about 1500 BC, and then Ezekiel about 600 or so. God's been dealing with a stubborn people for about 900 years.
Yeah. That disposition never completely left. It resolved at times, but it always seemed to find its way back among the people. That stubbornness that's prevalent to their own demise and destruction at this point. Go ahead, Jim.
He also told them not to be afraid of him.
Yeah, that's right. We'll see that before we're done here as well, that he's going to have to kind of get past the fears and trepidation that he might have of how they're going to respond and react. Go ahead, Randy.
One thing that amazes me in this, I don't understand, is that God will tell them, prophesy to them before it happens, during it happens, after it happens, everything, and still won't believe you. Take one guy over here as a false prophet, and he'll say anything, they'll believe it. Lock, stock, barrel, a little bit of it.
Yeah.
We'll go with it. That's just amazing.
It is baffling that people will ignore truth and resist at every turn. And then falsehood will arise and they'll embrace it without hesitation. And generally speaking, it's because this is more appealing to them at the end of the day.
Seen that the Babylonians were coming, they said, no, they ain't coming.
Yeah.
They ain't doing this, but here they are. They're there.
Yeah.
Well, don't you believe him right there? But they still don't believe him.
But is that not the exact definition of stubbornness? when you absolutely are not changing course, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter how many Babylonians come down here. It doesn't matter how many armies come down here. It doesn't matter how many people get dragged captive back there. None of that's because I've just decided that I'm staying to this path. And the truth is, we've all probably had that type of stubbornness about us about something. Let's just hope it's not about doing what's right in the eyes of God.
Shows the hard work Ezekiel's got.
Yeah, it's not going to be a fun job, that's for sure. Any other questions, thoughts? Appreciate all that. So, what's he command Ezekiel to do when faced with the opposition? Yeah, not to be afraid. We mentioned that a moment ago. Go to back to chapter 2. Look at verses 6 and 7. Be not afraid of them, neither be afraid of their words, though briars and thorns be with thee, and thou dost dwell among scorpions. I would have started, I'd been challenged right there probably, right? Thinking about how am I going to deal with that? Be not afraid of their words, nor be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house. Ezekiel, they're going to do anything and everything they can to get you to turn away from this message. They'll be like dealing with thorns, briars, and scorpions. But don't turn. Don't let fear kick in and change and manipulate. Thou shalt speak my words unto them, verse 7. Whether they will hear or whether they will forbear, for they are most rebellious. Quick lesson is we've got to kind of reframe our thinking sometimes, though we probably don't encounter the kinds of difficulties he may, but the truth got to be spoken, and it's the only thing that matters at the end. And we can't decide, well, I'm not going to say it because I know they're not going to like it. Truth has to be shared irregardless. Add chapter 3, verse 8. Chapter 3, verse 8. And behold, I have made thy face strong against their faces, thy forehead strong against their foreheads. As an adamant harder than flint have I made thy forehead. Fear them not. You're stronger than them, Ezekiel. Why? I'm asking that, by the way. Because God's with him. You're doing the work of God. Don't be afraid. And I'm going to make you stronger than you think you are. Fear them not. Neither be dismayed at their looks, though they be a rebellious house. Moreover, he said unto me, Son of man, all my words that I shall speak unto thee, receive in thine heart, and hear with thine ears. Have you ever heard somebody speak and you know as they're saying it, they don't even believe it? How much confidence does that give you? When the person who's delivering the message, you can see it in their body language, you can see it in their eyes, you can see it in their attitude, that they don't even. Ezekiel's got to buy into the message himself if he's going to deliver it in the right way. You absorb this into your heart, Ezekiel. You get this message into your ears first. And then what? Verse 11. Then go. Then go. Get thee to them of the captivity unto the children of thy people, and speak unto them, and tell them, Thus saith the Lord God, whether they will hear or whether they will forbear. Either way, they push it aside, they receive it. How they respond to the message is irrelevant to the mission and purpose and command that he's giving Ezekiel. Go do this. You're stronger than them. You have my authority behind you. You've got my message that you've received into your ears and into your heart. Go deliver it. And I'll make your forehead like a rock when you have to deal with the obstinate challenges that they might bring. Thoughts or questions? Go ahead.
This also feels like a test of sorts, the way I think about it. And it seems like a test that we can can learn from even now. Here's a very dangerous, potentially life-threatening job that I'm choosing you to do. And while I am choosing you for it, the real question is, how much are you willing to risk for it? Are you willing to lay your life down for it?
And his belief in the message is what's going to build the confidence he needs to actually go fulfill the work. If he doesn't believe God can do these things, if he becomes just as obstinate as the people, then why would he go risk his own life and put it in jeopardy? That's why he's got to have the conviction of heart first before he ever goes and faces those challenges. So the next question then is, what warning does Jehovah give to Ezekiel concerning his duty? And there are a couple of passages that he references for that. First in verse 8 of chapter 2. He says, "But thou, son of man, hear what I say unto thee. Be not thou rebellious," that's what we've been talking about, "be not thou rebellious like that rebellious house. Open thy mouth and" what? "And eat that I give thee." Similar language, by the way, is in what context? Is there any other place we see that kind of language? We've already talked about this. I think we did. It's hard for me sometimes when I study. I have a hard time sometimes remembering, did I actually just study that on my own, or did I actually talk about it in the class? I believe there's a moment in the book of Revelation where John is told to do the same thing, to digest the message. They're slightly different. If you looked at, they're slightly different in what's happening with each, but it's similar language. So he tells him, listen, digest this message. Go ready to open. Don't you become rebellious like the others. Jump over to chapter 3, verse 17. So he says, "Son of man, I have made thee a watchman unto the house of Israel. Therefore hear the word at my mouth, and give them warning from me. When I say unto the wicked, thou shalt surely die, and thou givest him not warning, nor speakest to warn the wicked from his wicked way to save his life, the same wicked man shall die in his iniquity, but his blood will I require at thine hand." It's probably one of the most challenging. We talked last week that chapters 2 and 3 are really kind of summed up in verses 18 and 19 of chapter 3, because that's kind of the whole message here. Ezekiel, not going to be an easy job. They're not going to like it when you go speak to them. Go speak the truth anyway. Go tell them anyway. You're a watchman over Israel. Go tell them anyway. Because if you don't, they're still what? They're still lost in their iniquity, but walk up to them and say, "You all are doomed," and walk away. That I don't believe is the imagery here. Because then it just becomes about appeasing my conscience. Well, I told you so, right? I told you why. That's not what I see in the command and instructions that God has given to Ezekiel here, where as if he's just saying, "Listen, Ezekiel, it doesn't really matter, except you need to do this, or you're going to be guilty of iniquity as well." No, I think all he's trying to emphasize to him is that everybody's got accountability here. Everybody has responsibilities. Theirs is to listen to my message, respond to it, make the changes, and do what's right. Yours is to go tell them that message. If they do or don't respond to that message, they're going to be responsible for that. But if you don't go tell them, you're responsible, at least for your side of that. And now you're both in trouble. Again, when a righteous man doth turn from his righteousness and commit iniquity, and I lay a stumbling block before him, he shall die. Because thou hast not given him warning, he shall die in his sin, and his righteousness which he hath done shall not be remembered. But his blood will I require at thine hand. Nevertheless, if thou warn the righteous man that the righteous sin not, and he doth not sin, he shall surely live, because he is warned also thou hast delivered thy soul. You do your part and accept that accountability. You share your New Testament equivalent. I believe an equivalent. Galatians chapter 6, verse 1. Brethren, if a man be overtaken in a fault, ye which are spiritual, restore such a one in a manner of meekness. Right? Same thing. The Bible talks about in the New Testament, he that converteth a sinner from the error of his ways saves a soul from death. Saves a soul from death. I don't know what or if people will respond to the message of truth or not. All I do know is that if I say nothing, then they may have missed out on an opportunity to know what righteousness really was, and I may also have to hold some accountability as it relates to that situation. That's what he's very specifically talking to Ezekiel about in these chapters. Not going to be easy, not going to be enjoyable, be like being around a bunch of thorns and scorpions, but it's your job, Ezekiel. Go be the watchman that I want you to be. Go ahead, Bob.
The term watchman comes from that person who's designated a position on the wall of defense in the city. And it's his responsibility to sound the alert.
Yeah.
Fall asleep. Now, I can understand you using the term watchman with Ezekiel as far as the children of Israel. I don't think he was a watchman for any pagans or anything like that. But you bring it down to the present day, who is considered a watchman
Yeah.
in the church? And if we are all considered watchmen, are we at the same responsibility as what God placed on Ezekiel?
Yeah. And that's a great question. And if you couldn't hear what Bob was asking, he's asking, I'm going to sum it up a little bit here for you, Bob. Is there a New Testament equivalent of the same responsibilities that God gave to Ezekiel? Is anybody today the same kind of watchman that Ezekiel is called to be? Yes and no. Yes, the same kind of responsibilities are out there. Elders have certain levels of responsibility when it comes to things. Evangelists have responsibilities when it comes to preaching the truth and declaring the things that people need to hear about righteousness and unrighteousness. And yet, I would also argue, though, but neither of those is called in the same fashion that Ezekiel is. Neither of them is given the same kind of specific assignment like Ezekiel is. So I would argue there's parallels, not necessarily anybody identical to what was given to Ezekiel in that circumstance. We had things to learn, not necessarily things to go, this guy and this guy are equal in the picture. Say it again one more time.
The message is the same. Either way, you're to teach.
That's right. Though the responsibilities may not be exactly the same because of Ezekiel's particular circumstance, none of us are being called Son of Man at 93 times and given that kind of parallel relationship. But the point is, go teach and go declare that message and let folks know about what's happening in their lives, because number one, if they don't ever hear it, will they ever change? And number two, we all ought to, and maybe the difference is we ought to care enough in some ways. And it's hard. It's hard for any of us, but still a responsibility, I think, that is still there and prevalent today. Okay. Next week, I'm changing that bell to 10 till. So that's all I would have needed. We will ever so briefly wrap up this lesson and move into, I guess my point is, do lesson 3. Because I don't know how far into lesson 3 I'll get, but I will, Lord willing, get into lesson 3 next Wednesday. So be sure to look at it.